Actually, Gamers Nexus was wrong about one thing.
Why'd you make me do it, Linus? Why'd you make me do it? Today we're reviewing the RTX 3070 Ti. Its MSRP is $600. That puts it $100 above the RTX 3070. It's coming out 1 week to the day after
the GeForce RTX 3080 Ti.
And that card launched at $1,200. We called it a waste of money and said it was 71% more expensive for about or less than 10% more performance. So now we're reviewing the 3070 Ti. The tone has been set. The stage is prepared for the 3070 Ti's arrival. You can see we have prepared such stage ourselves. And in this review, we're going to be looking at the GA104 silicon that is a higher quality than the 3070 silicon and the 3060 Ti, but it's ultimately the same silicon that's in the three of them. And we'll be going through all the normal numbers, but also, unfortunately, spending a little bit of time responding to Linus from his WAN show. Wouldn't normally want to do it, but he did sort of drag us into it, so we'll be going through that as well. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. We use Squarespace for our own GN store and juggle complex, multi-piece orders all the time with it. Squarespace makes it fast for us to roll out new products with detailed pages full of galleries, videos, and descriptors. It's also useful for your own resume sites, for photographer or project portfolios, or for starting your new small business idea. There's never been a better time to try and start your new business than right now, and we can vouch that Squarespace makes it easy. Visit squarespace.com/gamersnexus to get 10% off your first purchase with Squarespace. Since this is a repeat of the 3080 Ti versus the 3080 or 3090, whatever, we'll sort of start the review with the same thing, which is a time saver. It is a waste of your time to learn too much about the 3070 Ti because ultimately it's, on one hand, the value is not good, and that's all there is to that angle. On the other hand, if you are buying one because you walked into a Best Buy 3 weeks from now and it happens to be on the shelf, it doesn't really matter what we say. You're probably buying it either to resell it or to use it yourself, or you're buying it because it's sort of like a gas shortage, where there's news that there might be a shortage, and so everybody rushes the gas stations to buy it all out so that they don't end up being the sucker with no gas, even though they started the week with a full tank. This has happened to us recently on the East Coast, by the way. So that's what we're looking at today. Now, the price increase is about 20% here, MSRP to MSRP. That's how we do our reviews. And the exchange for 20% is a couple of FPS. And that couple of FPS, it ends up being worth about 4 to 5% up to about 10% in rasterization. It looks like the average in our suite is closer to the range of 7 to 9%. And in RTX, it's variable as always. You get a little bit more at the higher end with a 3070 Ti over a 3070. All those percentages are based on a 3070 baseline. So that's what we're looking at. The 3080 Ti, really its purpose has become clear while working on the 3070 Ti. The 3080 Ti is an offensive launch by NVIDIA. It's obviously a money grab where NVIDIA is boosting its ASP because someone in the shareholder group said, someone on the board said, these are going to be sold out instantly. They're going to be resold for a lot more. Why don't we take some more of that since they're going to be purchased anyway? And reputation be damned. We'll make it back in money. We'll worry about the reputation later. There's only two of us after all, so what's the harm? But following that fiasco, it's become clear why the 3080 Ti exists, at least to us. The 3080 Ti sort of looks like a decoy product. The 3070 Ti is this making anyone nervous? The 3070 Ti starts to look like it offers great value when compared to the 3080 Ti. Kind of like the 3080 Ti looks like value compared to the 3090, except you can't ignore the fact that you shouldn't be buying a 3090 for gaming. And if you're buying it for professional work, like we would use it for when Andrew's working in Unreal Engine or Blender or something, then you need the VRAM, and you don't get that with the 3080 Ti. So it's not, to us, really a clear comparison between the two of them. So then, that's what we're looking at today. First, we need to talk about whether or how MSRP influences price before we progress further, because we will be predicating a lot of what we're saying on sort of the same points as last week, which is that starting with a higher MSRP does actually matter, and it sets a statement for what NVIDIA is trying to do. It tells us NVIDIA's goals, and it gives us a firm baseline that's not nebulous, that's not out there in the ether, that we can actually base things off of when we're making value judgments, because anything else is just a fool's errand, because we don't know what it's going to be scalped for. So that's how we compare things. Okay, so let's get into this MSRP price influence thing. Being on camera we all live in glass houses. In this instance, a stone has already come through my house, so I'm just throwing it out the same hole that it came through. Linus and GN, we're on good terms. And we have disagreements about things like this editorially sometimes, but just to be really clear up front, this isn't YouTuber drama, it's not like beef, it's just, he's sort of in his live stream said a few things about pricing and MSRP while he was trying to defend his own 3080 Ti review, which was poorly received by some of his audience, and he went unscripted. So going off script in the process, he referenced us and a few other reviewers and commented on our reviews. We understand Linus was, again, sort of speaking from the heart here, and was getting some undeserved hate on his review. But we do need to address him directly on saying that we were wrong about something.
I don't know how much used hardware Steve has ever actually bought in his life, but the way that it works.
So first up, it's not used hardware. We were talking about the 3080 Ti as it's sold as scalped hardware. Our statements we made originally were that the 3080 Ti is $200 higher than deserved MSRP, $1,200 versus $1,000, would influence to some extent the price at which it is sold, especially scalped on secondhand sites or reseller sites like eBay or Amazon's marketplace, places like that. That was our statement. So this would not really classify as used hardware in this instance. When a scalper sells something, it's not likely to have been used or not for very long. So people are buying them and selling them with the intent to make money. Ergo, MSRP does matter. They're not going to sell it lower than MSRP. So it does set a floor.
That's not typically how it works in the secondhand or in the secondary market.
So again, not really the second-hand market unless you're playing semantics about how many hands it has passed through, in which case it'd be more like 5th or 6th or 7th. So scalpers are buying cards and most likely not using them and selling them at a markup. The scalped sales, which is what we were talking about, not the used hardware, old hardware sales, will scale on MSRP because of that, and that's all there is to it.
The way that it works is typically it's way more closely tied to actual real-world performance and what else is available on the market. And that is the way, and that has always been the way. So something that performs way better, has more of a value proposition, regardless of what the MSRP is typically going to be worth way more.
I actually don't really completely disagree with Linus here. Just the one thing is he did say typically, and it's not a typical market. So can't really draw those comparisons today just because of how the market is today and for the foreseeable future, the lifespan of the Ti cards that are out now. Linus has purchased more used hardware than I have. He said he's correct about that.
And that's something that I'd be happy to go toe-to-toe with Steve on, because I think that is just based on, I don't know what I really don't know what he's basing that on, honestly.
We decided to work with a script and pull data from 93,679 used GPU sales or new GPU sales through reseller websites, and use data instead to justify our position. The total sale value for the cards whose data we pulled was $71 million. And we were able to analyze that using strict filters to limit data. So for example, knowing we're pulling TI instead of not TI data, or super instead of not super, whatever. And also we set filters for things like broken cards being sold only for parts, and filters for things like getting the fans out of there, replacement parts, things of that nature. When we posted the 3080 versus 3080 Ti scalped prices screenshot a week ago, Linus replied and said it was too soon to tell for that, and that it wasn't a fair comparison, that they would equalize with time. So we have stripped the 3080 Ti versus 3080 comparison in Linus's favor here. In the chart we're about to show, we're listing the AIB partner MSRP increase on card A versus card B, where A and B are listed sequentially in the left of in the axis of the chart. And one bar represents MSRP, the other represents the resale value when sold through another website later. That would be something like eBay, for example. The closer these bars are to each other, the closer the MSRP is scaling with the resold price. And again, that's based off of about 94,000 GPUs that were sold in this data. The larger the red bar is, the more we see the performance versus the resale value diminish. So this would be the opposite of Linus's argument. It would be the angle instead that the price is going up regardless of performance, even more than we had suggested originally. As you can see here, the 1080 Ti actually gained value. At launch, it was around 17% higher in MSRP from Nvidia, while it has been at 41% higher since February 1st of this year. That means that the resale or scalped price has outscaled the performance uplift and the original MSRP. For the next card, the RTX 2080 Ti launched at a 43% higher NVIDIA MSRP than the RTX 2080, but has had scalped or secondhand sales at 37% higher. That's pretty close to one-to-one with MSRP. The GTX 1070 AIB was 52% higher in MSRP than the GTX 1060 6GB AIB MSRP. NVIDIA had an FE thing back then. And we see a 58% higher average selling price for the 1070 in our data over the 1060 6GB when resold. That's pretty close again. The same goes for just about everything. The 980 Ti to 980 shows a huge surge in resale price actually, despite not seeing that big of a performance increase. The 6800 XT and non-XT reinforce this, as does the 1660 Ti versus 1660 and Vega 64 versus Vega 56. There's one example we found that was actually completely in Linus's favor here, so Linus would be correct with this one, in that the RTX 2080 launched at 112% higher price than the 2060's initial MSRP, but that's only being resold for 47% more. That we think if you try to analyze it here, it's probably because there's not really a replacement for the 2060 in today's market. It's the 2060, whereas the 2080 has a lot of analogs. 1080 Ti is one of them, 2080 Super is fairly close, 2070 Super. And then, of course, the newer cards do directly slot in to replace the 2080, so maybe that feeds into it. At this point, though, we've proven that MSRP is at least somewhat related to the price it eventually sells for. This isn't that important. It's just we're going to make the same arguments again today as last week, so it's important we address that. But we judge NVIDIA's actions based on its MSRP, tells us what it's doing, what it thinks the market will pay, and that's important for us when evaluating the card and how it's meant to be positioned. And also addressing some of the comments that a 3080 Ti at 1200 is a great deal compared to a scalped 3080. Sure, that's true in the same way that I'd rather get shot in the arm than shot in the face. But in the same way benchmarks are like for like, the market conditions when you make these comparisons for our reviews have to be like for like. Can't compare scalped to not scalped. They need to either both be MSRP or both be scalped to make a value determination, except for in this specific instance where you have only one of those two options and you personally are choosing an action on whether to buy or not buy, but we can't judge based on the instances you run into only. So let's get into the benchmarks, finally. Frequency validation's up first, always useful for helping define the operating range of a card and making sure that it's working properly. The 3080 Ti operated around 1875 to 1890 megahertz after steady state thermals, with the 3080's original launch results plotting higher, at 1930 megahertz or so. The 3070 Ti plots between these two, and the card initially spikes to about 1950 megahertz, but as the load ramps and the temperature climbs, it falls to a relatively steady 1905 megahertz. There are a few spikes up and down, but for the most part, it's more stable as a line than its flanking components. That means we're less power limited here, where you'd typically be bouncing against power limits and seeing more core fluctuations as a result. Of course, it is still power limited, but not to the same extreme degree as some of the higher end cards. Up next, we'll plot the core temperature versus RPM response on the 3070 Ti. As a reminder, fans spin based on the VBIOS temperature target and really nothing else, so the memory temperature doesn't dictate fan RPM, at least not on this card, nor does any other component temperature. The 3070 Ti core ramps to about 76 degrees Celsius in a 21C environment, tested with 3D Mark 100% core workloads, and at this point it rests at steady state. The fan ramps to around 1730 RPM initially, but you'll see a plateau. Both fans are in sync here as well, by the way, and then they climb to about 1850 to 1900 RPM to sustain. The initial fan RPM and the ramp slows down and nearly plateaus before climbing an extra 100 to 200 RPM, which is an audible change in noise type and in volume. Typically, we want to see more hysteresis here to reduce the instant acoustic hit, as that's a lot more noticeable to a human user than a gradual ramp is. Thus far, it's in line with other cards. We have the 3080 Ti plotted here too, just for reference. Next, we'll look at the core and memory thermals during the same test. For this testing, we used software and hardware, and memory temperatures were measured using software, but validated with physically attached thermocouples to the memory packages. The workload remains 3D Mark here, so it's more similar to gaming, while other workloads like FurMark stress VRM components more. The 3070 Ti's hotspot temperature plotted in the upper 80s when tested in our 21C environment. That's fine. There's not a lot of room for aging or a bad case, but the GPU fan should adjust if thermals climb higher. The memory plotted in the 80s, which is also fine. We're well within spec here rather than the usual sort of, barely, technically spec, so that's an improvement from Nvidia. It's possible that other workloads stress the memory more than here, but thus far it's looking better than the 90 to 100C range that we're seeing on the 3080 Ti. Gaming benchmarks are up next. Now, like the 3080 for the 3080 Ti review, we reran the 3070 numbers because there has been an improvement since the last time we tested it. The improvement's somewhere in the range of 3.4 to about 4.6%. Depending on what game it was. So the 3070 has been freshly retested, and the 3080 also has been retested. The 6800 series has seen no movement from last time we did do a validation pass, and we're mostly seeing changes in the 30 series cards from drivers and other advancements. We'll start with Tomb Raider and spend more time evaluating the behaviors here. Even if you don't play this game, it's good because it'll give us an opportunity to hopefully better understand the value of the cards. We'll speed the next ones up after this. Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 4K had the 3070 Ti at 78 FPS average with lows well paced at 69 and 68 FPS. The 3070 FE Ti-less version was at 71 FPS average, allowing the 3070 Ti a lead of about 9.8% in exchange for $100 more. By comparison, the 3080 holds a 26% lead over the 3070 Ti, or a 38% lead over the 3070 non-Ti. Let's break that math down simply. The 3070 Ti is able to achieve 80% of the 3080's performance for 86% of the price. The 3070 can achieve 73% of the 3080's performance for 71% of the price. The value needle, in other words, hasn't moved. We're in the same spot. Nvidia isn't trying to help anyone, but that was clear when it decided to dilute its silicon supply into more SKUs at a higher ASP. Back to the chart, the RX 6800 non-XT remains about 4% ahead of the 3070 Ti in this one, with the 6800 XT closer to the 3080 than it is to the 3070 Ti. At 1440p, the 6800 pulls ahead further and establishes a 6% lead over the 3070 Ti, with the 3080 at 163 FPS average, or 23% of the 3070 Ti, and the 3070 allows the Ti a lead of 7% here, which diminishes from the 4K advantage it held. That aligns with the change to the GPU SM count more than anything else, and is what we'd expect. The 3070 Ti holds 82% of the 3080's performance here, with the 3070 at 76% of the 3080's performance, similar to 4K, but allowing the 3070 to climb more in value relative to the 3070 Ti. At 1080p, we become CPU bound and encounter a limit of about 180 FPS average on the Nvidia cards in this game. The 3080 and 3080 Ti and the 3070 Ti are all functionally equal, not only in average FPS, but also in 1% and 0.1% lows for frame time consistency. There's no value to be had at this resolution other than the value of looking at your video card and thinking, that guy from Nvidia called this thing a Ti.
The GeForce RTX 3080 Ti.
Rainbow Six Siege at 4K had the 3070 Ti at 154 FPS average. That establishes a gap of 7.7% over the 3070 non-Ti, with the 3080 holding a lead of 21%. The 6800 XT from AMD is advantaged to the 70 cards, of course, but the 6800 is behind them at 4K. At 1440p, the 3070 Ti did about 283 FPS average, totally unplayable, gross, in fact. Only pores would settle over such a low frame rate, and if you can't afford its price tag, then it's not for you. And you should keep your pinky on your glass when you drink, because you haven't earned the 3080 Ti or the 3070 Ti. Now, please make way for paying customers as we move on to 1080p. Okay, good. Now that we've gotten rid of the peasants, we can talk about 1080p performance. The 3070 Ti runs 396 FPS average here, which means you need a 6800 XT or a 3080 Ti, otherwise you are physically disallowed from enjoying this game. It runs like a slideshow on the 3070 Ti, assuming the slideshow is displaying a new slide every 2.5 milliseconds. Over the 3070, the Ti holds a 4% lead for 20% more money. That's 1% more frames for every $25 if you want to break it down like that. So the value argument is, again, not that strong. Red Dead Redemption 2 is next. At 4K, the 3070 Ti ran at 71 FPS average, a lead of 7.4% in exchange for 20% more money. It's at least not as bad as the 3080 Ti's 71% price hike for 10% more performance in some games, but maybe that was part of Nvidia's plan to make this one look better, like a decoy product. Even still, $100 for an unnoticeable change in frame rate is a rough value proposition. The 3070 Ti ends up this same 7.4% ahead of the 6800, roughly, with the 3080 holding a lead of 21% over the 3070 Ti for about 17% more money in MSRP. That decoy product theory is looking pretty good right now. At 1440p, the RX 6800 climbs past the 3070 Ti as expected, but the two are functionally equal in overall performance. It does bring Nvidia closer to AMD than the 3070 previously allowed at this price point, maybe contributing to the decision to launch the Ti, as if from hubris, because Nvidia doesn't like to give up a top position in any category. And that's not a bad thing, because competition is what we want. But read the room, Nvidia. The RTX 3070 Ti outdoes the 3070 by about 6.3% here, diminishing the value. The 3080 holds a lead of 18% over the 3070 Ti. At 1080p, the 3080 Ti is led massively by the 6800 XT Nitro and the 6900 XT stock alike, thanks in part to Nvidia driver overhead, while the 3070 Ti is about equal to the 6800 non-XT. The lead over the 3070 non-Ti is about 5.7% for the Ti. A pattern at this point has emerged. If we had future sight, the 3070 Ti's future would read, not worth it. It'd also read, money is not in your future. We're going to start going through these a lot faster, so you can pause if you need more detail on any single chart. In Three Kingdoms at 4K, the 3070 Ti held a 9.9% advantage over the 3070, one of its peaks. The 6800 stock remains above both. As a reminder, AMD holds a lows advantage in this title versus Nvidia. At 1440p, the 3070 Ti maintains an 8% gain over the 3070, while the 6800 maintains a lead over the 3070 Ti of about 3.5%. The 3080 boosts significantly higher than both, landing at about 94 FPS average here. Cyberpunk 2077 at 4K high had the 3070 Ti leading the 3070 by 8.4%, falling in line with the others. The 3070 Ti is a great GPU for increasing Nvidia's average selling price for shareholder confidence. At 1440p, the 3070 Ti landed at 81 FPS average, outpaced expectedly by the 6800 XT and the 3080. The card is roughly tied with the 6800 non-XT and outdoes the 3070 non-Ti by about 5 FPS average. So, great. At 1080p, we see a 5.9% advantage from the 3070 Ti over the 3070 at 119 FPS versus 112 average. The 6800 lands between them, but the 30 series holds better lows here than the 6800 does. Enough for rasterization. We've made the point, so time to move on to some lightly ray-traced titles. Tomb Raider at 4K will start us out with ray tracing. This is still mostly rasterized just with RT shadows, so it is one of the easier RT workloads. In this one at 4K, the 3070 Ti ran about 10 to 12% ahead of the 3070, so it's a more meaningful percentage at 12 than we saw in most rasterization tests. Nvidia maintains advantage in RT performance over AMD, but this game's light use of RT does mean that the 6800 is close by. At 1080p, the 3070 Ti maintains a 9.5% lead over the 3070, back down to the original difference, and again, unexciting. We ran a couple other RT games as well, and scaling outside of Minecraft is mostly the same across them, or otherwise just not worth it. So this is pretty dull, and we know enough now that we can just close out this review and skip the rest of the games. Power consumption testing is up last. This helps us determine the efficiency. This testing is at the board level and not at the wall, so we are only measuring the video card power. Testing is comparable directly between AMD and Nvidia. The RTX 3070 Ti FE card pulled about 296 watts when stock, with the overclock pushing us to 326 on the FE model. The original 3070 FE ran at about 225 watts, and AMD's RX 6800, meanwhile, pulls about 239 watts stock. The 6800 XT is at 294. So then, for efficiency, the 3070 Ti compared to the 3070 is pulling about 31% more power for not that much percent more performance. So that's it for this one. The 3070 Ti is not worth purchasing purely based on the performance of the price. The value proposition is not good. It scales better than the 3080 Ti, but be careful of getting gaslighted into thinking that the 3070 Ti is therefore a good value just because the 3080 Ti was much worse. They're both bad value. But the 3080 Ti starts to look a bit like a decoy at the high end to trick you into thinking that the 3070 Ti is better. Now, maybe that's not what NVIDIA's intent was. It probably wasn't. They just want to sell silicon. But at the end of the day, if you can get a 3070, the performance increase is functionally irrelevant. It's very unlikely you'll notice the frame rate difference in them, and it's $100 more. That $100 is very noticeable for a lot of people. It has an immediate impact on what else you can buy, or you could just save it and use it for something else in the future. So, and as always, just a reminder, if you're happy with your system today, if you have older parts, like a 10 series or something, you can do a lot to stretch it and make it last a little bit longer. So if you're happy with what you have, then keep using it. You don't need to get sucked into the upgrade cycle. The people who are going to be the most in the most exposed position here are those who are trying to complete a build and don't have an existing build that they can use, especially people who need it for work, or you need a hobby and escape. Gaming is it, and you can't get a GPU and you don't have an old one. That's where you have the most exposure to getting ripped off, but you also probably have the most invested in trying to buy one. But if you're pretty happy with what you have, you could leave it alone and ride it out for a little bit longer if your card is still good. No reason to create more e-waste anyway, although you could probably scalp it yourself and make some more money. But that's the only value to the 3070 Ti, is buying it with intent to resell. Otherwise, the other cards just offer a lot more, 3080 and 3070 included. And the RX 6800 is in a decent position as well, but NVIDIA still remains dominant in ray tracing specific performance. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. You can go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, and we'll see you all next time.